Welcome to Product Marketing, Lesson 4, Product Launch and Influencers. This is the last session, the last lesson in the 4 series. Hopefully by now you've gone through the process, and in this lesson you will learn about the role of influencers. We'll talk about the launch process itself and the importance of content marketing and why content marketing is important. More than following the 4 lessons, the 3 lessons before this one, by now you should have done some of market research. You should have thought at least about how you're going to develop market and customer intelligence. That will inform you on your strategy, on the target segments you're going to go after. That will also help you determine who are your target customers, what are the personas that represent those target customers, and hopefully by now you have a good idea on positioning and you've developed the messaging framework, which is where we ended in the last lesson. So today we're going to talk about the go-to-market strategy. How do you build a launch plan? How do you execute? And then you have to do sustained marketing. And obviously that's not where it ends. That's why this still has an arrow. It's basically a nice flow and a process that you need to follow to have a effective marketing campaign for a product. Right, so let's start with launch. Why do we call it launch? Of course, we have an image of a rocket, and nobody wants a rocket to just fail and come back to the ground. We call it launch because it's not just an announcement. It's not a point in time where you just reveal, okay, we have my product out, people hopefully they will come. If you build it, they will come. That usually is not the case. Second, the launch is only the beginning. One of my managers was talking about imagining if the way we launch rockets into space was the same way we launch products sometimes, where as soon as the launch is done, the people at mission control go home. And the rocket and the astronauts in the rocket have not even left orbit. How would you feel if you were one of those astronauts? Well, that's how many products feel when there's too much focus on the launch itself and not on the ongoing activities. And the other part that's really important about launch, and I think that this is where I want to focus the rest of the conversation today, is about how do you build momentum, which means how do you take a product using the launch as a point in time where you're going to make that product successful. Think about the rocket. You usually want to launch a satellite or something that is a very small part, and everything else in the rocket is rocket fuel. If you look at the Columbia shuttle or any other rocket, the majority of the space in the rocket is for the fuel that's going to propel that satellite to space. The same way, at the top it's your product, and the rocket fuel is the momentum that your marketing launch is going to provide it to get to where it needs to go. And that means it requires effort. It also requires you need to have a plan of where you want to go. No one launches a rocket without having a very clear trajectory on where you want to go and how to get there. It requires focus, meaning avoiding any other distractions. And it requires an accelerator, the gasoline. Without that rocket fuel, the rocket will not get anywhere, even if you had a lot of effort and focus and planning. And that accelerator could be customers, could be throughout social media, and could be through influencers. Influencers are probably the most powerful accelerator that we can take advantage of. Let's talk about influencers. When we mention influencer marketing, a lot of people think we're either talking about celebrities or talking about social media. So let's talk about celebrities. You've probably seen Troy Polamalu is a great NFL football player, fantastic, from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I happen to be a Steelers fan. Now he signed up in 2009 as a spokesperson for the Head & Shoulders shampoo, and they're still running the commercials. In fact, I saw one yesterday. So it's been 5 years almost since, at least 4 years, then they've been still running those commercials. And the brand has grown 8 to 10% in sales. Well, you can say, well, that's successful. The question is, even though I like Polamalu as a football player, is he really influencing me? Obviously, Head & Shoulders is seeing results. What would have happened if instead of using Polamalu, they would have had any other person talking about this shampoo? Maybe Polamalu grabbed my attention. The interesting thing is that there's no scientific way of knowing this. What is exactly the influence of celebrities that celebrities have? But I want to point out this is kind of the traditional way of looking at influencers, but I think it's just scratching the surface, and obviously it's very expensive. The real importance about influencers are the people who influence how your customers look up for guidance and for opinion. So the people that influence your customers, when they have a question, when they want to know about a product, when they want to make a decision, it could be a celebrity in some cases. Well, Oprah is probably the best case, right? When Oprah recommends a book, I think it's not because she's a celebrity, it's because people trust her judgment. There could be also associations. People look up to the, for example, National Association of Realtors, if you're a realtor, for guidance and recommendations. It could be experts in your field. It could be also friends. It could be peers. In many instances, it could be analysts. It could be the press as well. Or it could be early adopters, the people who start using the product. For example, the people who use a product for the first time and write reviews. Once a product has a couple negative reviews on a major shopping site like Amazon, it is going to be very difficult to make that product successful online. But also, talking about the influencers, not only celebrities, but also social media, popularity is not the same thing as influence. So Kim Kardashian has 18 million followers, almost 19 million. However, she's not in the same category as Oprah in terms of how much people trust her judgment. If she recommends a I don't know, maybe a brand of bags, it could make it popular, sure, so she has influence in that area. But if she recommending a book to read about science, highly unlikely that the target audience for that book is going to care about Kim Kardashian. Which brings a very important point. Influence is contextual. So Kim Kardashian is going to have a lot of influence in certain areas like fashion. She's not going to have a lot of influence in other, let's say, more intellectual areas. Not only because those intellectuals are probably not her followers, but because she doesn't have authority in that area. She's not looked at as an expert. Going back to the definition, the people who are making decisions on intellectual matters like intellectual books or other areas, they're not going to look up to Kim Kardashian for guidance. Here's another way of looking at the product launch cycle. So we talked about it in an earlier lesson, and this one is a slightly different version, which instead of talking about how the product evolves, it talks about the type of customers that buy the product. And this was created by Geoffrey Moore, and it has two important points. The first part is that when the product is first launched, there's a set of customers who are the innovators. Those innovators are the ones who are willing to take a risk. And then you have some early adopters. The early adopters are the critical mass. So let's think about, for example, how DVDs became popular and how HD audio did not become popular. Audiophiles and movie aficionados, people who had a lot of money and always want to have the latest gadget, those are the innovators. As soon as audio HD came out, you probably haven't even heard about it, they bought it. And they bought the first players. They were probably a couple $1,000. And they didn't care. They were happy. In fact, remember the laser discs is another good example. A lot of the innovators bought it, and even some early adopters. With HD audio CDs, the early adopters didn't buy it. With DVD players, though, the innovators bought it, then some of the early adopters bought it, and as soon as the volume started growing in this curve, the prices for those products started coming down because the manufacturers now had volume. And that's the point where the early majority starts catching on, and you have enough critical mass of movies or music in that format, and you can see it all over the place in stores, and your friends start getting it. And your friends who are early adopters, maybe you have a friend who is not necessarily an innovator, probably is not willing to take risk as much, but he's somebody who enjoys music, and he starts buying that, and then that's when the early majority gets the product. Once the early majority starts adopting the product, then it's a home run. That's when you make the real money. And then you have the late majority, the people who want to see, who are more skeptical, they're slower to adopt. And then there are laggards. There's still people that I don't think that there's anybody still using vinyl except for I don't know, because you're a collector. But think about where Blu-ray is right now. Blu-ray is really at the point of going to the late majority. If you think 2-3 years down the road, there'll still be a few laggards that still prefer to use DVDs because that's what they have. It's surprising. There's still people using dial-up in some places to access the internet. Those are the laggards. So one, understanding the type and behavior of your customers is important. But the other important point is the chasm. The chasm is this point here where products die. And this is also where companies die. If you are a startup and you start seeing some early success from people who are innovators, people who really like things in your space, and even some early adopters, you're on the right track. But you need to be extremely mindful of the chasm. And just like if you were riding this in a motorcycle, you need to make a jump across the chasm. That jump is one of the biggest challenges for companies and for products today. So one person who's been looking at this is a psychologist more than a marketer, but obviously marketing is a lot and psychology are very, very aligned, is Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote this book called The Tipping Point, and The Tipping Point is basically a book about understanding how things go from being adopted by a niche group of customers into being adopted by an early majority. He has many examples in the book and how this happens, and he studied a lot of that. And his conclusion is basically that there are three kinds of people that companies need to be aware of. Those are the ones who make these things happen. The first one is our connectors. Here's a definition that I found online about the connectors, not necessarily from the book, but the connectors are people who have many connections, and they're like you can see here, they have ties in many different realms. So it's not somebody who's popular just at school or somebody who's just popular at the office. This is somebody who really is connected in different circles, and he becomes a conduit between them. He connects multiple circles of people, and he engenders those connections. What's really interesting here is that this cross-fertilization that otherwise might not have ever occurred. So without a connector, a product can be successful in one circle, and that circle, if you have somebody who influences that circle, it could be very powerful in that circle, but it doesn't go beyond that. And that's where also where the mavens play a role. Mavens are the people who are helpful. They want to help other people make informed decisions. The mavens are usually recognized because of they have expertise, but they like sharing this expertise. These are the people who write reviews, for example, on Yelp and on Amazon. The people who go and spend time on the forums answering questions for novices. The people who go to Quora and answer questions about the topics they're passionate about. One, because they know about a lot about a subject. Could be fashion, could be technology. Second, because they enjoy participating and helping other people. And they like sharing that knowledge that they have because they're passionate about the topic. And last but not least are the salesmen. Salesmen are people who have charisma and the people who have very persuasive skills and influence other people's behaviors. So how these things work, think about the last time you made a purchase decision where you were not very sure what you want to buy. Maybe, for example, a digital camera. I love photography and I get a lot of questions from my friends. Hey, what camera should I buy? And in that case, they're seeing me as a maven. Have you ever been also in a party where somebody starts talking about a restaurant that they love, and then you probably make a note in your cell phone about visiting that restaurant? Well, that could be a connector or could be a salesman. So this is basically a way to think about influencers in these three major categories, and thinking about who might be the connectors in your market, who are the mavens, and who are the salesmen. Great. Now that you thought about those influencers, let's evaluate the purchase decision. Understanding customers, we established at the beginning, is fundamental. Understanding how customers buy. If you think about how people bought cars in the 1980s, if you were alive, I'm a little bit older, and I actually bought my first car around that time. You had money and you decided you want to buy a car, and you probably have been exposed to the car because of the brand, maybe some advertisements and TV or print, which were the main marketing channels back then. And you probably heard a couple opinions from your friends. But then you go to the salesperson at the dealership, and that's where 70% of the sales process happened. Most of the time when you walk into the dealership, you didn't really know about prices, you didn't know about the specs, the different models of the car, the different versions, the accessories, the options, the guarantee, the warranty that is offered in the car, the availability, the available colors, all those details about a car, even the quality and the size of the engine, all those things you learn at the dealership through the salesperson. So if you look at this as a process from going from, hey, I need to buy a car, getting to the other end where you actually have a product, 70% of that sales process happened at the dealership, and the sales teams had 70% of the responsibility of taking that customer from point A to point B. Now let's look at how this happens today. Once somebody decides to buy a car, they're gonna start paying attention on Twitter, and they're gonna probably go to YouTube to look for some videos. They're gonna read some of the websites on the internet, the Blue Book to check prices, Edmunds.com to look at reviews, Autoblog to check used cars. And by the time the person goes to the dealership, they already have gone 70% through the process. Most of the times when people show up at the dealership, they already know all the car they want. They've compared with other cars. They've already almost made the decision, and they're just focusing on the transactional part of the transaction, basically, of the purchase. So the role of sales is much smaller, and the role of marketing is influencing that 70% of the purchase process that happens driven by the consumer on its own, doing research. And that's why modern marketing is about education. It's about influencing that 70% of the research process that happens not directly with a company, not in person with a salesperson, but throughout other channels. That's the essence of content marketing. Content marketing is not new. Content marketing existed even back then. If you think about, for example, the Michelin Guide, it's existed, I think, for over a century now, and it's a great example of content marketing. Content marketing is about being helpful. It's about helping your customers making those decisions. Content marketing is less about selling, and it's more about providing guidance. So if you want to do this, this is an opportunity to showcase your expertise. So take all you know about your products and make it available to customers in a way that helps them make a decision. Not always those customers are going to end up buying your product, because being helpful through content marketing is about helping customers with the questions they have, the knowledge gaps they have, the problems that they're facing, the things they're trying to figure out as they're making a purchase decision. For example, if your customers are trying to buy a car and they're concerned about gasoline, they might be thinking, well, how do I think about hybrid and an all-electric and a traditional gasoline engine? Should I get a V6 or should I get a V4? How much money am I going to save? So imagine if automakers create more guidance comparing those options and what are the benefits of each one, and maybe even talking about diesel. The VW diesel cars are more gasoline efficient than many hybrids, and there might be things that customers don't know. So by providing that information and that knowledge that addresses those customers' questions, you're being helpful. And even if the customer doesn't buy from you today because you don't offer the most cost-effective car for whatever other reason, you'll still be building your brand with the customer, and the customer might recommend you or might recommend your guide to other people. And for this to be effective, the content marketing needs to be written in the language of customers, without exaggerations, without superlatives, without the traditional marketing speak that people hate. Because you want your content marketing to feel like it's people talking to people, not a marketer trying to convince somebody. And content marketing is also an opportunity to reflect your company values, meaning if being helpful is a company value, if having expertise, if it's being customer centric, if it's being customer relationship oriented. So when a customer is reading about a topic that is central to your business, that's an opportunity to reflect your values. Maybe it's ecology and care for the environment, or maybe it's respect for people, whatever those values are. And last, make it interesting. So part of the challenge is, how do you take that techno speak about engines and diesel engines and hybrid and make it interesting? That's obviously a topic that a lot of people care about. But if you write a 200-page white paper written by an engineer, it might not be as interesting. That's why infographics are so powerful. Short YouTube videos might be powerful. Fun things that you can share on social media, etc. And think about social media in this context as a channel to get those content marketing tools being shared and dispersed. So imagine now in the same customer buying experience, if you create a video and you create this guide, you start answering questions on Twitter, you promote this guide on Facebook, so you're present. Even though the customers are not talking to you directly, you're part of the conversation and the research process that the customer is going through. So that's how you rock the launch process. You start early on engaging your influencers, thinking about the people, making a list of the people who are influencing decisions from other people, the people that other people look up to. And you build a list of those influencers and they start building a relationship. That relationship is not going to be based on buying products. It's going to be just giving them the opportunity to know more about your products. Because the nice thing is that all these innovators and early adopters, they care about new products. They care about new things that are available in the marketplace. They are going to be very helpful in giving you feedback. And hopefully you're going to engage them even before the product launches. And that's going to help you build this momentum to jump like Evel Knievel across this chasm and go to the early majority. You take your best customers and you use their testimonials. Use them ask them to write reviews for your product. Ask them to write a video. Ask them to share with their friends. If you can get your influencers and the early adopters to really love your product, if you can educate them and give them an option to experience your product, and this is a key part, if your product is really good, then they will tell their friends, and that will give you the momentum and the rocket fuel to grow. Trying to do this on your own through mass media, buying pay-per-click and buying advertising in traditional old school marketing is not going to work anymore. You need to get that leverage from influencers and from the community to jump through that chasm. Then in the early majority, you think about scaling your marketing to grow. Once you've crossed the chasm, then there's obviously no clear signal except for the type of customers, and you typically see explosive growth in sales at this stage. Then it's about thinking about how you scale, how you capture the maximum opportunity, how you cover the market that's available to you before other companies can move and get an advantage of you. You need to be very careful about balancing growing too fast and leaving gaps where your competitors can jump in and steal the market from you. Early mover advantages are very fragile and very easy to lose. Then you get into a stage where you've already launched your product, you're already making money, and it's important to recognize when your sales are slowing down, not because you're not doing good marketing or because there might be other reasons for the market to slow down. You need to recognize based on customers. If you already saturate the early majority and you're starting to reach into the late majority of customers, then that's when you have to switch your marketing tactics to spend less money on growth and more money on maximizing your profits, because that process is starting to decline. And there's a very important point where you need to start looking for your next opportunity. So this graphic, the chasm, is not useful only in terms of understanding how customers adopt new technology and what kinds of customers do it, but also tying your marketing strategy to the stages on how your products on the market are working together, and making sure that your marketing is designed not only to sell product and to tell people about your product, but to move your product along this process and having the context of what you need to do to get to the next stage in the success for your product. And that's lesson 4. For assignments, I suggest that you write a list of the people who influence your customers. You need to do research. You might have already found this. Hopefully you've already found this in the early stages. This is not only about writing the categories of people. This is about building the actual list of persons and individuals that you want to reach out and influence with your product. And maybe even starting to build those relationships, reaching out to them, saying, hey, I know you're a fan of this category. You love, I don't know, history books, or you love learning how to cook, or you're a photography aficionado, and I have a new product that might be interesting for you. Starting to build those relationships, starting to build lists of people that are interested and want to get updates from you. If your product is really cool and exciting, they will want to be updated, and they will feel special about being part of the club of people who are getting that early access to new technologies. Second, you need to understand that buying process and list the questions that your customers have in their mind when they're going through that purchase process. Like, it could be, if you're selling cars, what is my fuel efficiency? If you're selling books, it could be, what am I going to learn? How sophisticated is this book? Is this for novices or for people who are professionals? And then you take those questions and you can turn them into content marketing tools. Third, you need to review your product launch plan and see not only how you can build momentum, but where your product is in each stage, and make sure you have a plan for each one of those stages of the product lifecycle. In terms of additional resources, I can recommend this book, Crossing the Chasm. It's a little bit oriented towards technology marketing, but I think it offers a number of concepts that are useful across the board in any industry. And by the way, also The Tipping Point from Malcolm Gladwell is a super interesting book. If you're into marketing, that's definitely an enjoyable book, and it's going to help you understand how products tip, meaning how products cross that chasm, and how to deal with influencers. Great. With that, I want to thank you for completing lesson 4 and for completing the 4 lessons in the Media Bistro product marketing course. I hope that these 4 lessons were helpful for you. They should have given you a few nuggets of things that made you think, planted a few seeds in your mind about topics that are interesting that you might want to research on your own. And I hope I was able to give you a little bit of guidance to make your product launch more successful, your product lifecycle entirely more successful, and hopefully will help you become a better product marketer and a better marketer overall. Here is my Twitter handle. I hope that you follow me, and my blog in case you want to keep in touch and read more of the things that I'm thinking about. I look forward to the discussion in the next few days, and have a fantastic day. Thanks again.